WECT investigates. A federal probe in Columbus County involving the FBI, IRS, and a controversial former sheriff.
It's been 3 years since Jody Greene resigned as Columbus County Sheriff amid an array of accusations. But since then, no indictments have been filed. WECT investigative reporter Connor Smith has spent weeks digging into where this case stands. Connor, what have you uncovered?
Yeah, FBI, IRS, and SBI investigators are still looking into Greene, the sheriff's office, and dozens of other people in Columbus County. Experts tell me it is normal for an investigation this big to take this long. Over 3 years later, the dark cloud of the Jody Greene investigation continues to hang over Columbus County.
Sick of these black bastards. Every black that I know, you need to find him to start with. He's a snake.
WECT Investigates aired this recording of former Sheriff Jody Greene in September 2022.
Black bastards. They think I'm scared? That's stupid.
WECT's reports of the recording got District Attorney John David's attention and triggered an SBI investigation.
We simply do not feel as though Jody Greene should be someone who ever carries a badge again.
Then in December 2022, we broke the news about a federal probe into Greene. Weeks later, he resigned as sheriff for the second time. Since then, at least publicly, it's been quiet in Columbus County.
Just because the public at large doesn't see movement on the case, that does not mean that there is not movement on the case.
To get some perspective, we sat down with experts like defense attorney Todd Spodek. While he has no ties to the Greene investigation, he spent 2 decades representing people under federal investigation.
The investigation is taking a normal amount of time, meaning 3 years for an investigation of this scope is not abnormal.
In December of 2022, we reported that federal subpoenas were going out and investigators were seeking cell phones from the sheriff's office. In 2024, reporter Carly Brousseau with the Assembly revealed the FBI and IRS were looking at dozens of people in Columbus County, including sheriff's office employees, business owners, and elected officials.
We learned that they were pursuing a lot of leads related to financial arrangements that various businesses and people in the community might have with the sheriff's office.
That's where the IRS comes in.
And their job as an IRS special agent is to figure out why this money went to certain person's hands.
Robert Nordlander is a former IRS special agent. He says investigators are likely looking into possible tax evasion, money laundering, and kickbacks.
Most of the time, it's a crime of greed.
Yet 3 years later, nobody's been indicted. So we reached out to all the major players in the investigation. This is Connor Smith with WECT News, but nobody is talking. I spoke with Jody Greene. He declined to do an interview, telling me he has nothing to say. Current Columbus County Sheriff Bill Rogers says he can't comment because of the active investigation. The SBI confirms the investigation is still active, but a spokesperson wouldn't offer any details. DA John David said he couldn't comment until the U.S. Attorney's Office makes a final determination regarding the SBI's, quote, comprehensive investigation. After Greene resigned back in January 2023, David told the SBI to only report their findings to the Department of Justice, but the DOJ does not confirm active investigations. And the IRS sent us this statement, quote, the IRS is not permitted to discuss a particular taxpayer's tax matter or their taxes based on federal disclosure regulations and federal privacy laws. David is not seeking re-election this year. Jenna Early and J.K. Summers are running to replace him as district attorney. At a recent candidates forum, we asked both what they would do to ensure this investigation finishes soon.
It's my established relationships and communication that will allow for all cases to move forward.
Transparency is a big issue, and if I can work with the SBI and other law enforcement agencies and put a rest to this and get rid of this.
Summers also indicated that David did not treat Greene fairly. When I pressed him for clarification, Summers admitted he's not very familiar with the case, which he calls a witch hunt.
He didn't get due process as far as I know, and that's an epidemic across this whole district attorney's or this district.
Michael Easley Jr., the federal prosecutor in charge of this district, resigned last year. With David also stepping down, experts say priorities and timelines can change.
You want them to not rush an investigation, particularly one that's going to impact the whole community. You want them to do their job, do due diligence, and make sure it's perfect.
Meanwhile, more than 3 years later, a community is still left without answers, unclear when the dark cloud of this investigation will ever go away. Now, despite running into dead end after dead end trying to get any details or updates on this case, we continue working to get you updates on the investigation. WECT Investigates has filed public records requests with the Columbus County Sheriff's Office for any subpoenas they've received, all county email communication with investigators, and payments from the Sheriff's Office to different businesses. Fran?
Connor, all these years later, do the experts you talk to still think indictments are likely in this case?
Well, I'm told federal prosecutors will not bring it forward until they have enough evidence to both indict and convict. They tell me it must be airtight, especially the case when it comes to cases like this, which deal with government agencies and so much public interest. And remember, WECT investigates what matters to you. If you have an idea you want us to check out, send us an email at investigates@wect.com. You can be one of the first to get any updates on this case or any breaking news. Just download the free WECT News app, which also has our free live streaming newscasts.